Welcome to Nightmare Coming, where folklore bleeds into reality. Every story you thought was just a tale has a truth waiting in the dark. One nightmare at a time, we dig deeper into what was left unexplained. If you dare to question what's real like, subscribe and share the story that still haunts you. Then, let's step into tonight's nightmare. Story 1. The Victorian House. I recount moving into an old Victorian home and noticing strange shadows and whispers. It felt almost alive, blending classic haunted house lore with unsettlingly personal experiences. I remember the first night we moved into that Victorian house, like it was a living memory pressing against my chest. The house sat at the end of a quiet street, its paint peeling in long gray strips, and the wooden porch creaked under every step as if it were groaning in complaint. I thought I could hear the wind whispering through the eaves, but soon I realized the whispers weren't outside. They were inside, low, and almost too soft to catch at first. Boxes were scattered across the floor, and the smell of old wood and something faintly metallic clung to everything. That evening, while unpacking dishes in the kitchen, I felt a cold breeze drift down the hallway behind me. I turned, expecting a window left open, but every window was shut tight. I shrugged it off at first, telling myself the draft had followed me from the doorway, but then I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing just above the creaking of the floorboards I was standing on. There was no one there. The sound moved from room to room, stopping when I stopped, starting again when I moved. I could swear the hallway light flickered in response to the steps, and the shadows along the walls seemed to stretch and bend toward me as though they were waiting. At night, I would wake to the sound of whispers right at my bedside, soft voices murmuring words I couldn't understand, but the more I listened, the more I felt the tone was accusatory, like I'd done something I couldn't remember. I told myself it was my imagination. The house was old. Maybe it made noises, but the noises started to feel purposeful. One evening, I found myself in the parlor, staring at the fireplace. The logs had been neatly stacked when I left, but now they were scattered, as though someone had been sitting on the hearth, rolling them with their hands. The thought of another person living there was terrifying, but when I checked every room, I found nothing. Then there were the shadows. Not shadows from furniture, but shadows that moved against logic, flickering along walls in shapes that were vaguely human, but just off. Sometimes, a figure would appear at the top of the stairs, motionless, watching me, then vanish when I blinked. I tried recording the activity with my phone once, hoping for a rational explanation, but the footage showed nothing, except, in one clip, a mirror reflection of me standing in the hallway when I was actually in the kitchen. That same sound again, the one I thought I imagined, would echo from the hallway at odd hours. Sometimes, I caught glimpses of shapes out of the corner of my eye, tall and thin, always just beyond focus, like the house itself was stretching to look at me. And then there were nights when the whispers turned into something that sounded almost like singing soft, dissonant, but familiar, as if a lullaby I'd heard long ago had been twisted by the house. I would lie awake, paralyzed by the knowledge that whatever was in there with me didn't want to be noticed too obviously, but it wanted me aware of its presence. Occasionally, I'd wake to the feeling of someone or something brushing past me in the hall, leaving a cold trail on my skin. Sometimes I wonder if it was ever really gone, if it lingered in the corners of the rooms, in the creak of the stairs, waiting for the next person to move in, to notice, to feel what I felt. I stayed there for months, convincing myself it was all in my head, until one evening, the air grew so heavy that I couldn't breathe. The shadows thickened into shapes that felt solid, and I realized I couldn't ignore it any longer. That night, I packed the essentials and left, feeling eyes on me the entire time, watching my retreat. When I look back, the house still stands at the end of that quiet street, peeling paint and all, and I can't help but wonder if it remembers me, if it waits for the next person to unpack and hear its whispers, to feel its steps behind them in the dark, as I did. Story 2. The Abandoned Farmhouse. A visit to a deserted farmhouse revealed hidden rooms and objects that seemed deliberately placed, making me question whether I had really been alone. The farmhouse was supposed to be just a stop along the way, a quick detour on a drive through the countryside to photograph old architecture. It sat back from the road, half hidden behind overgrown trees and a broken fence, its roof sagging in the middle like it had been holding its breath too long. I remember how still the air felt when I stepped out of the car. No birds, no wind, just the faint buzzing of flies somewhere near the barn. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open with my sleeve pulled over my hand, and it gave a slow, drawn-out groan, the kind that feels like a warning. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. There were old boots by the door, a rusted lantern on the table, and wallpaper peeling off in yellow curls. I remember thinking how strange it was that the furniture looked untouched, like someone had just stepped out and never came back. The first floor was small. A kitchen, a sitting room, and a staircase that seemed ready to collapse under its own weight. I climbed anyway, flashlight in hand, watching the dust shimmer in the beam like tiny insects. Upstairs, I found 3 rooms. The first 2 were empty, except for a few old photographs scattered on the floor faces of people, staring out with that unnerving stillness only old photos have. But the third room had a door that didn't open all the way. Something heavy blocked it. I pushed harder, and the smell hit me before I saw it. Mold, earth, and something else, something that felt alive. When the door gave way, I saw that the floor was partly dug up, a shallow pit surrounded by wooden planks. There were small objects arranged in a circle on the dirt. A child's shoe, a cracked doll head, dried flowers tied with thread. It didn't feel like trash. It felt arranged, deliberate. I crouched down, my flashlight flickering, and noticed faint scratches along the baseboards. Marks like someone had tried to write words but didn't finish. My skin prickled. Then, behind me, something shifted. It wasn't the house settling. It was the sound of movement, soft, dragging, like fabric brushing against the wall. I froze, my flashlight trembling in my hand, listening. The sound stopped the moment I turned. I told myself to keep calm, to finish what I came for, but every part of me wanted to run. I backed toward the hallway, keeping the beam steady, and as I did, I noticed something I hadn't before. The photographs from the other rooms were gone. I swear they were there minutes earlier, scattered on the floor. Now the floorboards were bare, except for dust. I went back downstairs faster than I meant to, but the moment I reached the bottom, I saw something that made me stop cold. On the kitchen table right, where I'd first seen the rusted lantern, lay one of those photographs. Only now, it wasn't faded. It looked freshly printed. The man in the picture wore the same jacket I was wearing. My mind tried to explain it coincidence. Maybe I misremembered, but the unease rooted itself deeper. I left the house, slamming the door behind me, but as I reached the fence, I turned for one last look. The curtains upstairs moved slightly, even though the windows were closed. I drove off fast, my heart pounding, but after a few miles, curiosity got the better of me. I checked the photos on my camera, the ones I'd taken inside. The images were clear until the third one, then the files turned darker, blurred, and finally empty, except for a faint outline near the dug-up floor. A shape that could have been a person, or maybe something crouched low to the ground, waiting. Sometimes I think about that farmhouse when I pass by old buildings. I wonder if someone else has gone inside since, if they've seen the same room, the same pit, the same objects placed in that careful little circle. And sometimes, When I look through my camera roll late at night, I swear that missing photo tries to reappear. Just for a second, like the farmhouse remembering I was there. Story 3. The Lake Cabin. Alone at a remote cabin by a foggy lake, I encountered inexplicable reflections and sounds, blurring the line between memory and hallucination. The lake cabin wasn't part of the original plan either. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway, a quiet spot to write, but as soon as I arrived, I felt the isolation wrap around me like a thick, damp blanket. The cabin sat on a narrow strip of land between the forest and the water, and the fog hung low over the lake, swallowing the far shore in a gray haze. I unpacked slowly, aware of the silence, the kind of silence that presses against your ears, so heavy that even the sound of your own breathing seems loud. The first night, I lit a fire in the small stone fireplace and tried to read, but the words on the page kept drifting away as I became aware of subtle noises. The soft lap of water against the shore, the creak of logs settling in the cabin, and the occasional thump from above, like someone walking across the attic. I told myself it was the house shifting, just old wood reacting to temperature changes, but the thumps seemed to come in rhythm with my thoughts, or maybe against them, always just a little too deliberate to ignore. I noticed the mirror above the mantel seemed different too. It reflected the room normally, except that sometimes, when I glanced at it from the corner of my eye, it would show me standing in a spot I hadn't occupied yet. Once, I caught a reflection of myself at the window, looking out over the lake, and when I turned, no one was there. The next morning, I found my notebook open on the table, pages I didn't remember writing filled with words I hadn't thought, in a handwriting that looked like mine but felt wrong. I shook it off as a dream I hadn't remembered, but that night, the noises came back, louder this time. Footsteps pacing across the floor above me, though the attic door was closed, and then whispers so soft I could barely hear them. But when I strained to listen, they formed words. Names. My name, repeated over and over, carried by a voice that sounded both familiar and not, like a memory I didn't want to remember. Sleep became impossible, so I stayed awake, staring out into the fog over the water, waiting for some rational explanation, some animal maybe, but nothing came. On the third day, I ventured outside to the edge of the lake, the mist curling around my ankles, and I saw movement under the surface. Not fish, not ripples from wind, but darker shapes, shifting just beneath the glassy gray water, moving closer and retreating with deliberate intent. That evening, I woke to the sound of someone or something scraping along the outside of the cabin, circling it slowly, and my reflection in the mirror showed shadows behind me that weren't cast by the fire. I didn't turn. I knew they were there. I stayed frozen until the first light of dawn seeped through the fog, and then I fled the cabin without looking back. Months later, I realized I'd left the notebook inside, the pages still scribbled with that strange handwriting. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the pacing overhead, the whispers, the subtle drag along the walls. Sometimes I wonder if it was ever really gone, if the lake still holds the shapes beneath the water, waiting for the next person to notice, to see their reflection where it shouldn't be, to feel what I felt in that cabin wrapped in fog. Story 4. The City Apartment. Urban legends collided with real events when I lived in a city apartment that harbored strange smells, sudden cold spots, and persistent footsteps at night. The city apartment should have been safe. After weeks on the road, after haunted houses, abandoned farmhouses, and the fogged lake cabin, I thought a simple urban apartment would be comforting. Just walls and neighbors and electricity running reliably through the outlets. The building itself was old, brick and mortar, with a narrow stairwell and a faint smell of mildew that lingered in the hallways. I moved in on a Thursday, the elevator creaking as it carried my boxes to the third floor, and when I unlocked the door, the air inside was cool and still. That first night, I noticed the smell, a mix of damp carpet and something faintly metallic. I thought it was just left over from the previous tenant, until I started noticing the cold spots. Not just the usual draft under the door or from a window, but sharp, localized patches of cold air that hit me like someone had opened a freezer directly behind me. At first, I shook it off, thinking my mind was primed to expect the unusual after everything I'd been through. Then the footsteps began. Always at night, always pacing across the apartment, sometimes slow, sometimes faster, and always stopping when I stopped. I'd lie awake in bed, counting them, trying to convince myself they were neighbors in the hall or the old building settling, but the pattern didn't match anything I could place. Then came the smells. Sometimes faint, like baking bread, other times acrid, like burning metal. I'd walk through the rooms, follow the scent, and find nothing. One night, I woke to a whisper, soft, almost a sigh, right beside my ear. It wasn't words, not in any language I could understand, just an urgent presence pressing close. I sat up, the covers tangled around me, and saw the shadow in the corner of the living room. Not a trick of the light, not a normal shadow. This one moved independently, stretching along the wall, shifting as though alive, and I could feel it watching me. I froze. I told myself it was my mind, the lingering fear of the previous places catching up, but the next morning, the window was open slightly, though I was sure I had locked it. Things began to shift, subtly, objects out of place. A chair moved a few inches, my keys on the counter in a different spot. Small, almost inconsequential, except I never moved them. One night, the footsteps stopped, replaced by a persistent tapping on the walls. Soft at first, like nails lightly rapping plaster, then louder, moving across each wall in turn. I traced the sound to the bedroom door, and as I opened it, I felt the air thicken, heavy, almost suffocating. The room appeared empty, but then my reflection in the dresser mirror shifted independently. I watched myself in the reflection sit up when I didn't, and my heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to flee, wanted to escape the apartment and the presence, but some part of me stayed, compelled to witness, to understand. Days later, a neighbor mentioned strange noises coming from my unit at odd hours. I didn't tell them I wasn't alone, not really. There was something there with me, subtle but undeniable, watching, moving, making its presence felt in ways that couldn't be dismissed. Sometimes, when I turn off the lights and lay in bed, I hear that familiar pacing, and I catch a whiff of that metallic scent. Sometimes I wonder if it was ever really gone, if the apartment itself remembers me, if whatever moved in with me that night is still lingering, waiting for the next tenant to notice the irregularities, the cold spots, the sounds that shouldn't be. Even now, I can close my eyes and feel the pressure in the air, the gentle, deliberate shift of something unseen, a quiet awareness that the city around me cannot touch. Story 5. The Empty Mansion. Exploring an empty mansion, I found traces of former residents, and something else, an almost sentient presence that seemed aware of my every move, leaving me to wonder if I was ever truly alone. The mansion was different from all the others. It wasn't abandoned, not officially, but it had been empty for years, its owners long gone, its windows shuttered, its garden choked with ivy. A friend of mine had mentioned it offhand, a property out on the edge of town that no one wanted to buy because people kept hearing things during showings. I told myself I was done chasing haunted places, but curiosity is a quiet kind of infection. It waits, whispers, then wins. I went one gray afternoon, Clouds sagging low over the tree line, air thick with the smell of rain. The front doors were unlocked. They opened without resistance, like the house had been expecting me. Inside, the air was cool and hollow. Dust muted every sound. The foyer stretched upward into darkness, a chandelier draped with cobwebs, its crystals dull with age. My footsteps echoed, soft but somehow too many, like someone else walked in time with me, one half step behind. I told myself it was the acoustics. I explored room after room, each one a museum of forgotten moments, furniture still covered in sheets, portraits staring down from cracked frames, the faint outline of where a piano once stood. Every room smelled faintly of something different. Perfume, smoke, damp fabric, as if the air itself still remembered who had lived there. Upstairs, I found a long hallway lined with mirrors, most of them clouded with age. My reflection followed dutifully until the third mirror, where it didn't. It stood still when I moved, its face blurred as if underwater. I froze. The air pressed closer, and behind the glass, I thought I saw something move, a shadow, sliding past me, though there was no one there. When I blinked, my reflection returned to normal, but the chill it left behind sank deep into my bones. I tried to leave after that, but the way back seemed longer. The doors felt farther apart than before. I found myself in rooms I hadn't entered, spaces that weren't there on the first pass. Once I stepped through a doorway and found myself in the same hall again, only darker, quieter, the mirrors gone. My flashlight flickered and then went out completely, though the batteries were new. That's when I heard it, a soft, steady breathing. Not mine. Close, too close. The kind of sound you only hear when someone is right behind you. I turned, slow, careful, heart pounding, and saw only a door slightly ajar at the end of the hall. The breathing stopped the instant I noticed it. I walked toward the door, every instinct screaming to leave it shut, but I pushed it open anyway. Inside was a small sitting room, untouched by dust, a single chair facing the window, and on the chair sat an open book. Pages rippling, though there was no breeze. I picked it up. Every page was blank, except for one near the middle, where a single sentence was written in uneven handwriting. You came back. I dropped the book and backed out, forcing myself toward the front of the mansion. The moment I stepped outside, the rain began, a thin, steady drizzle that smelled faintly of rust. I didn't look back, not until I reached the gate. When I finally did, I saw movement in the upstairs window, a pale figure standing there, still as glass. It didn't wave, didn't move, just watched. Later, I tried to convince myself it was a trick of light. Maybe my reflection, maybe something my mind conjured to justify the fear. But deep down, I knew better. That night, when I got home, I found dirt on my shoes that wasn't from the mansion's grounds. It was darker, finer, almost like ash. Sometimes, I wake to that smell of rust again, faint but sharp, lingering in my room, and I think about the mansion waiting, remembering, its doors unlocked, patient as ever. Sometimes I wonder if it was ever really gone, or if I never truly left. They say every haunted place keeps a piece of whoever walks through it. I used to think that was just a poetic way of describing fear, but now I'm not so sure. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night and can't tell which place I'm in: the Victorian house, the farmhouse, the cabin, the apartment, or that endless mansion of mirrors. The walls shift, the air thickens, and I swear I hear the same slow whispering that followed me from room to room across every story. Maybe they were never separate places at all. Maybe it's the same presence wearing different walls, different sounds, learning from each visit. I've moved countless times since then, always chasing the illusion of safety, always hoping the next place will be clean of memory, untouched by what I carried with me. But sometimes in a quiet moment, I'll catch the scent of that metallic air, or see a flicker in the reflection that shouldn't be there. Once, I heard my own voice whispering from the dark corner of a room I'd never been in before, saying words I didn't remember speaking. That's when I stopped pretending these stories ended. Maybe we don't leave haunted places. Maybe they follow, patient and quiet, slipping between rooms, settling into the spaces between thoughts. And maybe, when you finally notice the shift in air around you, the subtle sound of someone pacing in another room, you'll understand what I mean. Maybe you'll wonder too, if it was ever really gone.